There we go. Now I hear you. It's going great. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited to get started.
Yeah. How has your trip to North America been?
It's been good. Jet lag has been very, very bad. Um, but it's been mostly okay. I think yeah, because I'm 7 hours behind what I would normally be. So I just
Woof.
and I'm only here for 10 days, so it's not a very long time to get used to it. I'll probably get used to it and then have to go back and be
I was
like,
gonna say
oh,
you'll be used to it the last day you're here, and then you're gone.
yeah, exactly,
Well,
exactly.
thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. Like this was for anybody who's out there watching who doesn't know, we're going to be discussing the Tom King run on Omega Men, published by DC Comics. And this was chosen by you, Danny. So the question I wanted to kind of pose to you was just simply, was this your first time reading this book, or was this something that you had read previously that you were into?
Yeah, so this is my first time reading this. I think I haven't delved a whole lot into a lot of I guess Green Lantern lore other than mostly Hal Jordan and John Stewart stuff, and then with what's currently going on with like the Green Lantern shenanigans, I
Sure.
was like, let's get more into this. So I was yeah, so and I mean Tom King's always a solid choice I think as well. So
Definitely, yeah. Well, that was actually going to be one of the couple questions that I had for you, which was, why don't we start with the Green Lantern thing? So, for you, like, is the Green Lantern a character you've been into for a while, or was this character you kind of came to more recently? What is your history with Green Lantern?
right, so I remember interestingly enough, I remember being like this was when I lived in Australia, which was maybe I want to say pre 2006. And I remember really like John Stewart was like my Green Lantern at that
Right,
time, and
right.
I remember I liked him at the time, and it was yeah it was just one of those things, and then in high school I was kind of one of those Marvel or DC like you can only like one people, and I really like X-Men, so I was like, oh, Marvel only, so I kind of put that aside. But um then Rebirth came out with Jessica Cruz,
Uh huh.
and at the time I was suffering a lot with like panic attacks and stuff. So Jessica Cruz, who was a character who suffered a lot with anxiety, that was like a really cool thing to see. And I stopped being, one or the other kind of thing. And not because of Jessica Cruz, but that it was around the same time. So it was yeah. So Green Lantern's something that I've been like tangentially interested in.
Sure.
I read a lot of the Jessica Cruz storylines, and I have read the 2005 Green Lantern,
Okay.
with
Okay.
Hal Jordan,
Right.
but not a whole lot of Kyle Rayner stuff. So
So that's interesting because I feel like for a lot of people, and I'm assuming I'm older than you because I'm older than a lot of people on TikTok. So I'm gonna assume I'm 32. So
okay,
I'm coming from this from an interesting angle where it's like John Stewart was very much my Green Lantern because of the cartoon show.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
and I think it's funny because I think a lot of people of our age range see it that way as well. Like I remember when the Ryan Reynolds movie was coming out, I was in college, and I remember having people being like, "Is Green Lantern black? What is this? What's happening?"
That was exactly. I
Right,
remember being like, wait a second, I'm sure he's black.
which is hilarious because I think the opposite thing tends to happen now, where characters'
Yes,
races get changed and everybody loses their minds. But it's funny because I think that Hal Jordan is no offense to anybody out there who's a Hal Jordan fan, but I think he's probably the least interesting of a lot of the Green Lantern characters that are out there. And Kyle Rayner was a character who I liked, not as much as John Stewart, but I think John Stewart and Kyle Rayner both kind of got hit and by the fact that Hal Jordan was brought back and were unfortunately sidelined, even though Kyle Rayner, similar to Wally West, had really been established as Green Lantern, and John
yeah, because
Stewart had been established by the cartoon show for a lot of people as Green Lantern.
absolutely, yeah, because after the whole Parallax thing, Kyle Rayner was the Green Lantern, right? In the 90s run.
Yes.
So he'd been around for a while, and then obviously Hal's like, haha, I'm back. It's my show.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny too because I think that that's kind of like I think Hal Jordan coming back is emblematic of a shift in DC that I have never really. How can I put this? I don't want to sound like a bitter fanboy because that's not what I'm trying to be. I've seen a lot of folks out there. Hey, everybody, good to see everyone. I feel as though that like DC was for a very long time in the 90s, especially like pushing forward this idea of the character titles are legacies, and characters will like pass down those titles. Like Kyle Rayner will become Green Lantern, Wally West will become the Flash, and they will stay that way for a good amount of time. And funny, someone in the chat from Comics Kings in the chat says, growing up in the 2000s, reading the 2010s, I'm all Barry and Hal all the way. And it's funny because my students are like, well, Barry Allen is the Flash. And I'm like, you kids don't know what beautiful things we had with Wally West.
Is that, and I imagine with the Flash TV show,
sure,
like, Barry must be, for a lot of people, their Flash, and like anyone else seemed wrong.
Right.
So I can see that, but again, like the 90s Flash run like is so good, and really established so much of what we know as part of the Flash universe now.
Absolutely. God, yeah, absolutely. The like really like sort of the idea of the Speed Force as an entity and so many of the rogues and their characterizations is all connected with Wally. So it's always been kind of strange for me to see like Barry get all that stuff. It's kind of like watching your ex date a new person. You're kind of like, I don't know, this doesn't feel, exactly. So there's something about it that like always frustrates me purely from the fact of like, I loved the fact that DC was moving their characters forward and passing down this legacy. And then when they brought back Hal and then they brought back Barry, it was kind of like, all right, well now we've set the clock back a little bit. Which I was always disappointed by.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because it is like it's a legacy arc, right? And typically, so it feels wrong. Like it would be wrong for Wally, for example, to go back to being Kid Flash. Like that's not who he is anymore. But yeah, so like those sorts of things are weird, and even I suppose to a lesser extent when Dick Grayson takes over as Batman, the Batman Bruce Wayne returns, and it's like, oh, I'm Batman again. Those sorts of things, it's interesting to see that like backpedal, I guess is the word that I'm looking for, into something more like, I don't want to say new reader friendly, but people who are familiar with, I guess, Wally was also the Flash in the Justice League show as well, right?
Yes.
It wasn't Barry.
Yes.
That's interesting, but like, I mean, you can see it now. Like, there's lots of things that happen because the live action version happened, and comics kind of like retcon that.
Right. I think it's the live action versions, and then you also have there's a weird thing about comics where you kind of see the cycles that occur because you start to realize, oh, the people who grew up reading these comics are now writing comics, right?
Right.
Like, I imagine Jeff Johns grew up reading Barry Allen and Hal Jordan as Green Lantern and the Flash. So then when he gets to write those characters, he brings back Hal Jordan and Barry Allen as those characters.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess now, I mean, Wally West is the Flash now, and Wally West is Barry Allen's off doing a multiverse thing.
He's somewhere. He's in multiverse. He's in multiverse 2, as we learned about that there's a multiverse 2. Boy, that shit is wild. I love it so much, though. But it's that weird cyclical nature of things where I think now that people who like grew up on the Mark Waid run of the Flash, where Wally West was the Flash, are now like, Wally is actually the Flash. So we're gonna kind of bring Wally back, even though it becomes complex and weird. And it was funny that you mentioned Dick Grayson before, because I feel like, like you said, you would never put Wally West back to being the Flash, and you would never put Dick Grayson back to being Robin at this point, right?
Oh, absolutely. That would be so weird to see Dick as Robin. Like, I'd be like, ugh.
Yeah, it would be,
I don't like that.
You can't put him back in those pixie boots and the green underwear. That can't happen. But it's that weird thing where like you have let the barn doors open on Wally being the Flash, and now it's hard to close it. This is all to say, what I was intrigued about this comic was, this is really the first thing that Kyle Rayner has gotten a spotlight on in a very long time.
Yeah, yeah, because there was the original comic where he became the White Lantern, which the name is, I'm forgetting right now. It's like Green Lantern colon something.
Yeah.
That ran after the New 52, or like, well, during the New 52 after.
Right.
That started. But yeah, so like obviously Green Lantern at that time was Hal Jordan. So I mean, it was a really good focus on Kyle, and I think a lot of the characterization that came from this seems to now apply moving forward.
What is Kyle Rayner up to now? Is he in the current Green Lantern book? Because I feel like I haven't seen him around.
He hasn't appeared yet, as far as I'm aware. The only Green Lantern, because obviously, like, you know, the central power battery exploded, and all the Lantern ring, why not?
Tends to happen.
And, I mean, I don't know, you know, funsies. So we've only really seen how. Who have we seen? We've seen Hal Jordan, Joe Mullen, Teen Lantern, and Simon we've seen, and I think we've seen John Stewart as well.
Right. And Kyle's just kind of
Lantern
somewhere.
Yeah, and it might be different because he's got the White Lantern ring.
Right.
That could be different
True.
In terms of where his power comes from, because I guess the blue ring kind of like recharges it. There's all weird, funky things that come with the right.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But yeah, no. As far as I'm aware, we haven't seen him yet. But I guess we're only like 7 issues into the Green Lantern run.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I think he has been the one who has kind of suffered the most, because Jon Stewart has the exposure from the TV show, and Kyle doesn't really have that anymore. He's just got the older folks who remember him being Green Lantern. For the Love of Comics said New Guardians was the book I think that you were thinking of a moment ago.
Oh, yes, that's the one.
Yes. And he also said that Dick Grayson would still pull off the short shorts. Hey. Yeah, probably.
I guess he probably would. Whether he should is a different question.
So that brings us to this next point, which is let's get into Tom King himself. You said this was your first time reading this. And this is interesting kind of going back to, because it is such an early Tom King book. I don't believe it's his first DC book. I think his first DC book would be Grayson, which I believe he did before this, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly. And it's certainly not his first comic, which I think would technically be Sheriff of Baghdad. But I think that and Grayson kind of came out around similar times.
Yeah.
Regardless, it's interesting going back and looking at this. So, Danny, I want to ask you, what are your feelings on Tom King as a writer in general?
So in terms of Tom King things that I've read Vision, I've read Heroes in Crisis, I've read some of his Batman run, and see this now. Oh, and also actually today I caught up on Bat and the Cat. Batman
sure.
I think he's currently running. I think Tom King can be really hit or miss for me. I think
yes.
I think he's really good at doing like character-driven stories, effectively, like that are like driven by emotion. But I think sometimes he relies maybe a little too heavy on like some cheap jokes every now and then that I don't particularly enjoy. I also didn't know that he was an ex-CIA agent. I like Googled him today, and that came up, and I was like, oh, well, there you go.
And once you know that, it's kind of hard to unsee that in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I do. Heroes in Crisis was a story.
What else is there to say really but a heavy sigh?
I did really like the Vision.
Yeah, same.
And I also like Everyone Loves Ivy, which is one of his arcs just before the wedding.
Right.
I think it's a really great story.
Yeah.
But Heroes in Crisis, though. What a conundrum.
Yeah. What is it about his writing that you tend to find that you like, and what do you tend to like? You said it's hit or miss. For you, when does he hit and when does he miss, in your opinion? Yeah,
so I really like I do really like the kind of character, like emotional driven part where like
Sure.
it feels like the action is secondary to like what the character. Like sometimes I feel like with comics, it's very easy for the action to lead the characters, whereas like I feel like often it feels like the characters leading the action with Tom King, which I do like. I
Right.
think that works out quite well, and I think he delves quite deeply into different emotions that heroes might be facing at any time. Like one of the things that I did really like about Heroes in Crisis is the concept that they need to talk to people about
Yes.
their troubles,
Yes.
because that makes a lot of sense. But I think sometimes the decisions that his characters make, I'm like, I don't like, I can't get
Right.
behind that.
Right.
Um, and there, I mean, actually, one of the things that I had noted down
Mm.
for this talk, one of the things that I really didn't like in this book was I think there was a point where Kyle Rayner is like, "Oh, I'm going to show you the right way, which is truth, justice, and the American way." And like maybe it's the non-American in me, but I was just like, "Oh, I do not like that."
Yeah, that line didn't age well. That line was. I read that line and I was like, 6 years ago, that line probably would have like still maybe would have had some like a little bit of like cringiness to it, but I think it would have
Yeah,
gone down a little bit smoother. And some stuff's happened over the last like 5 to 6 years that has kind of soured my feelings on my home country. And I imagine
yeah.
many people feel the same way. And when he said that, I'm kind of like, oh boy, this line in particular did not age very well.
I know it was like so I was on the plane reading this and like I read that line and I was just like, oh, fuck's sake. That was just my reaction.
And it
Because I also feel like, I mean, the Green Lantern Corps is one, like, meant to be,
right,
like, a sector festival, and, like, other than that, it's, like, universe-wide.
right, right.
It feels weird to me that you would be like, let's do this the American way.
Yeah.
Um,
I would buy it
but,
more if like Hal Jordan was saying it because he
yeah,
has
well, because he was military, right?
right,
Whereas Kyle
right.
Rayner was comic writer.
Yeah,
So,
which is funny because he talks about that at the end of the series.
yeah,
And I think your point that you made earlier is something that he often gets he being Tom King, not Kyle Rayner, but that he often gets critiqued for, which is his like he sometimes likes to write the characters the way he envisions them rather than using clearly pre-established characterization.
yeah, for sure.
Which I go back and forth on that philosophy because on the one hand it's like Grant Morrison will sometimes make wild choices with characters, and when they do it, I'm all in. So maybe I'm a hypocrite
Yeah, yeah,
because I
it
like their
really does
stories.
depend.
Yeah,
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 exactly. It really does depend on whether, like, I mean, I didn't necessarily hate that, like, for example, in Heroes in Crisis, that Wally was going through such a terrible time with
sure.
his family gone. Makes total sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Him framing Harley Quinn doesn't feel like something he would probably do, but who am I to
Right,
say?
right.
I'm not. But
Which is ultimately
yeah, so
why
there's
it gets retconned
yeah,
not fairly recently,
exactly, and
right?
I mean, again, in Heroes in Crisis, Lois Lane releasing all the like videos to like the public or whatever.
Right.
That was a weird decision too. But I don't think the Omega Men suffers as much from that because really the only character that we
Yes.
already know is Kyle, um, who at that time hadn't been really in anything for a while. So
Right. Right.
it's not a blessing in that case.
Yeah, and someone in my chat here, Matan_IH. Hi, thanks for joining us. Something that they said was, I think what is great about comics is the constant reinterpretation by each writer and artist, and I agree with that. I think comic book characters, superhero comic book characters specifically, have to be malleable. But it's kind of like bending versus breaking, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Tom King, when when he bends a character, it can work really well. Like I think Vision is a great illustration of him bending a character.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone would have ever thought to do like a surreal David Lynchian suburban nightmare with the Vision, but you read
yeah,
it and it's executed so well and it fits. It makes sense, especially when you consider like the traumatic history of that character trying to create a family in the past, right?
Yeah.
So that bending definitely works. I think, have you been reading the Adam Strange book by any chance?
No, I haven't. I haven't.
I think he kind of broke Adam Strange. And this is, I want to tie this into Omega Men because as I was reading Omega Men, I thought a lot about the Adam Strange book. You know, you made your comment a moment ago where you were like, it's not a big deal with Omega Men because a lot of these characters, with the exception of Kyle Rayner, are characters that have just been kind of sitting on a shelf for a long time, right? So you can take them and you can reinterpret them, and people are probably not going to feel as strongly about it because it's not like a momentous character that people have a huge attachment to.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert for the Strange Adventures Tom King comic. Adam Strange is a war criminal now. And I don't know how I feel about it. It's not a great feeling. I don't, yeah. And when you do that to the character, it's like nothing, that you can't come back from that with the character, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, like, that's effectively the same with Wally West. Is that like he killed like all of his, not all of his friends, but he
right,
like, and like that's a really significant thing to have happened.
yeah, yeah,
And he deals with that how he deals with that. I mean, even worse that he like tried to cover up, right? Which is really
right,
where the crime is. Which obviously has been retconned, and I mean, even him doing it in the first place has been retconned. But
right, right.
what a journey. But yeah. So whereas in the Omega Men, and also I do think that sometimes things are different when it's in like a lot of Omega Men takes place in like effectively like a war situation, and,
Right,
and
right.
things are different in a war, and like what is acceptable and what isn't.
Right.
Although I don't think I'll ever lose sight of like, no, we need to do like the third way, like let's do that, which I
Right.
really liked. I thought that was done well, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off there.
no, that I think that was the end of my thought.
Well, no, what I was gonna say was Omega Men is interesting to go back and reread now, especially after reading everything, including I've also I love the Mr. Miracle book. I think Vision and the Mr. Miracle series are his two strongest works that I've read, in my opinion. But what I was going to say was it's interesting going back and reading this because this is going to sound like an insult, and I don't mean it as an insult, but maybe I mean it as a light critique, which is he has the themes that he likes to play with very clearly established right in this work, which is one of his earliest works. And he hasn't moved far away from those themes since then.
Yeah, I would say that it is like it I mean, effectively he likes to play with the moral gray zone, and
Specifically in war, which you mentioned before, like the morality in war.
And to be fair, his background as a CIA agent makes a lot of sense then, because obviously that's what he knows.
Right. Right.
So that makes a lot of sense to me, at least. And I think he also just likes heroes to suffer, I guess. So
Well, and so let's get into this, because this is a thing that like I have complex feelings on because of just my like general feelings about the CIA as an institution. You know what I mean? It's hard sometimes for me to read his comics when the allegory is so heavy in it. You know what I mean? I think that I don't think it's a coincidence that I enjoy Vision and Mr. Miracle the most, because while they certainly have themes about overcoming trauma and coping with grief, they're not as heavily engrossed in war allegory. Mr. Miracle gets into it a little bit, but because it is so focused on Mr. Miracle's grief as a character, it's not as heavy as Omega Men, which I read issue 1 of Omega Men, and it's talking about how the central planets have a resource that the entire galaxy is fighting over, and I was like, okay, so we're really just it's the Iraq War. What you're saying is this is the Iraq War in space. Got it. Okay. Like, it's not subtle at all. And I find that the parts of this that I enjoyed the most were the parts that were more the, like, world building that moved away from a strict one-to-one allegory and were focused on the characters versus the
Yeah.
parts where I'm like, you're doing an Iraq war allegory.
Yeah, absolutely. I can agree with you more than that. And I really don't think that the message behind effectively war is bad, both sides is bad, was
Yeah.
hidden very well. Which again, I don't particularly like because I think the messages was, with the exception of Kyle, both sides were as bad as each other, and I don't know if I necessarily agree that the oppressed people rising up against the oppressor is like necessarily a bad thing. I mean, in this book, obviously,
Right.
they did all turn out to be bad in the end. Well,
Right.
badish, but
Right.
I think again that falls into the whole everyone is bad, no one is good.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because like on the one hand I'm like, okay, this is interesting because it's taking the perspective of the what would ostensibly be classified as the terrorists by the American Western media. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. It's giving a nuanced portrayal, like exploring why people get involved in these extremist movements, right? Like this idea that like before it becomes both sides are bad, it's both sides have human beings on it, right? And
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
this is not me like excusing one group or another, but that is fundamentally true. Like any conflict is driven by the ideologies of the people at the top, and then you have the people at the lower rungs who are people who are really just trying to survive in this messed up world and have gotten caught up in this larger war machine.
Yeah, exactly. And like I mean, you can really see that like Callista is meant to be like the foil to the Viceroy, right? And
Right,
like they are really the worst people in this book.
right,
And everyone else has their own motives that all make sense. Um, and so I think and I mean that is true at the end of the day, is that like everyone kind of is either doing as they're told or like have their own motives for fighting, and I think that
right.
was done well. Even with like the heavy-handed
Yeah.
allegory that really was not hidden very
And
was
it
not hidden at all.
right, right. And it also presents the fact that like in those circumstances there are people who have actively harmful agendas that like are out to oppress groups of people, again on both sides. Like
Yeah,
people who are actively like, well, this side has a resource that we want and this side is maybe driven by a desire to oppress people who don't agree with them. Like there's all these like factors that go into it. But so I did think it was interesting seeing the more nuanced approach. I'm kind of curious to read Sheriff of Baghdad. I don't know if you've ever read it, like, but I also am like, I don't know if I'd want to read the Tom King talking about him being in Iraq, the Iraq War with the CIA, without allegory on it. If I'm already frustrated by the allegory part.
yeah,
But I do want to. I would like to get to the ending at some point because talking about the like both sides are bad thing. But I do want to hear your thoughts on this in particular before we get there. Which is, what did you think of the characterization of Kyle Rayner, but also of the Omega Men in general? Like, what did you think about the characters, the way they were presented? What were your thoughts on them?
yeah. So I think one thing that I did really like about Kyle is that he stuck to his guns the entire way through of we can find a middle ground, and effectively that's what he went there to do, right? Like in a sector where Green Lanterns or lanterns aren't allowed, he really did go there in order to like negotiate some sort of peace.
Right.
And I think he really stuck to that the entire way through, like right up until the end, where he was like, and I mean even like his final parting words, he's like, oh, like I'm not, like it's not, where I think I have it right here. He gets asked, "Are you them or us?" and he doesn't answer,
Right.
which
Yeah. Yeah.
I think really like encapsulates how like he impartial but not impartial, if that makes sense. And he really
Right.
did just want to find common ground for everyone to come out alive and
Yeah.
keeping and peace,
And,
which I did like. The Mega Men themselves I thought was really interesting because I think they started out, and I mean I guess that's how characterization works anyway, but they started out really one dimensional,
right.
and then like as like the layers were added in, you were like kind of like, oh, because I think they are painted as the bad guys in like those first like
Oh,
three
for
four
sure.
issues,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you slowly go, oh wait, and then like you show up at the planet and you're like, oh shit, fair enough, they're all dead.
Right.
So I thought that was well done because it is so easy to just be like, oh, they've captured him, like they've put a bomb in his neck, like, oh,
Yeah.
that's all really bad.
And they
So
present it like we've seen like with traditional like terrorist execution videos, right? Like again,
yeah,
going back to this idea of like, wow, this is actually like pretty edgy and nuanced that he's saying like, well, let's look at like why people do these things, right?
yeah,
But I agree with you that it is interesting the way that they're initially presented as these sort of like unlikable protagonists, and then as the layers are peeled away, you start to understand them better, and even Kyle starts to sympathize with their cause and why they're doing what they're doing. I think the moment it really clicked really well for me happens around issue 9, when you kind of like get the exploration of the emotions of each of the Omega Men, and because Kyle is the White Lantern, which, speaking of things that haven't aged well, him being called the White Lantern feels weird. But anyway, but that idea of like it's all of the spectrums of emotion and all of their emotions that they're feeling, and him empathizing with those emotions is what kickstarts the ring again. I thought that was a great moment. Like I really really liked that idea of it.
yeah. I did. Yeah, like it was like issues 8 and 9 that I
Yeah.
thought was really like the turning point for me. That I thought was done really well, and like when he has to go like present at the conference or whatever
Right.
that was.
Right.
I thought that was really cool. But yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and also the colors at that time, so great. All the different colors.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, the artwork is really strong in this. And it was interesting because a thing that kind of like grinds my gears a little bit about the way the book is presented. Like specifically, I was looking, I have the Comixology version of the Omega Men Deluxe Edition, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as an artist. Because the cover says The Omega Men by Tom King. Tom King wrote it. There's no mention of the artist on the cover, really, or at least not as prominently. And I was kind of like, this feels a little messed up that they don't say by Tom King and the name of the two artists in like big bold
Yeah, yeah,
letters.
yeah. Yeah, no, I I mean I agree. I think that's pretty shitty because I think with comic books the illustration is as much the meat, like as like it tells the story sometimes even more so than the and one of the things that I did think was really interesting, and I don't know if you picked it up, aside from Kyle Rayner thinking back to his history, there are no panels that like overlap the gutter. Like there's like nothing ever
Yes.
comes out of the gutter.
Yes, yes.
Um, which he alludes to in this last page, which I have open on
Yes.
my tablet here, where he says that it's like kind of like things like are barring you from doing things, which is like that's an artistic choice, right? Like
Right.
that's so all of that like really adds into how you feel when you're reading the story, and like the colors used and everything like really does impact it, and like you can see it. Like I mean, not the Omega Men, but I'm reading Batman and the Catwoman and the Batman, whichever way it is.
I think Batman's got time
Right now,
going.
and
Yeah.
they just changed the artist for the most recent issue, and it
Oh.
does change the feeling, which is weird because it's a limited series.
Right, right.
And so it's weird to change the artist like halfway through.
Yeah.
But
And it's coming
what
out
can
like
you do?
every other month too, right? I thought the
Yeah,
whole reason they were
it's
doing
not
that
like
schedule was very odd.
yeah, it's a weird release schedule for sure, and it's also all Christmas based.
Yeah.
Which is weird to be reading in September.
Yes,
And
yes.
presumably, if it's 7 issues in right now, like I guess maybe the first issue came out in December.
I think so, if I'm remembering correctly. Or it came out in like January of last year,
Yeah,
I
which
think. I don't remember.
is
Or January of this
interesting
year.
time.
January of this year. Oh, geez, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What year is this? I don't even know anymore.
Who knows? Who knows?
But yeah, it is that whole thing is weird. I mean, my feeling on it is just simply like, hey, look, if you're gonna make Mask of the Phantasm officially DC Comics continuity, fine by me. Do whatever you gotta do, because that movie rules. But regardless, yeah, no, that's a great point about the art and specifically the panel layout, where it really makes a lot of heavy use of that 9-panel grid. especially with
Yeah.
the metaphor that Kyle brings up at the end of this idea of being like, oh, I saw that as like the characters were trapped within these bars, right? And
Yeah.
I was thinking about you bringing up the us versus them comment, and I kind of like that, the fact that and then Kyle doesn't answer. And I think that idea is more compelling rather than both sides are bad. Because to me, in my
Yeah.
interpretation, and let me know how you interpreted it, but to me, like, I interpret that ending of there is no us versus them. Because even though we divide ourselves into these factions as human beings, we're all still collectively human beings. And if we're going
Yeah.
to survive on this world, in this universe, we have to accept that we're all collectively valuable in some way. Which to me, I think is more impactful and meaningful than, hey, you know what? Both sides are bad. Which is like, cool, that makes me feel a lot better. I still live in this I still live in this like bifurcated society where I have two options and everything sucks. And I wish that had kind of been more explicitly the message that King had gone for, rather than this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess it is like, I mean, that is the last, yeah, that is the last panel of
Mhm.
the book. But I don't think that that's the message that comes across with the rest of it, if that makes sense. Specifically when he's like updating Kyle on like what's happened to like everyone, like no one's having a great time.
No,
So
no. It was like, it was like the depressing version of those comedies that like end with like the freeze frames, and it like says like,
yeah,
like this person went on to
exactly.
study at UCLA. Like it's like gives their background. It's
Yeah,
like,
legally blonde but sad.
yeah, it's like everybody sold out their ideology and became the thing that they hated. The end.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know if I'm. Yeah, because I get that happens in real life. Like, I get that the funny thing is, like, the Dark Knight movie, for as much as it, like, has its flaws, the one line, the trailer line, I think is the truest thing that's ever been spoken. You either die the hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, right? Like, I think that idea is something that has proven itself time and time and time again.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it does kind of leave you with this sort of hollow feeling at the end of it, like, well, what was the point of any of this, right?
Yeah, well, exactly, and like that's kind of like where it comes across as like, don't bother trying to like have an uprising
Right,
because it's just gonna end up shit anyway.
right.
Which, and I think I do get that, but I think the joy about comics is sometimes they don't have to reflect reality.
Yeah, right?
um, but yeah, so I do think that Kyle ending on that note of like, oh, that like there's not really an us or them, like I think it is good, but like I don't know if that like translates to the rest of the themes of the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I agree with you, which is why I find the ending somewhat frustrating because, let's get into the ending. We're there. The thing that a trope that I have now become totally burned out on and tired of is we murdered a bunch of people, and then we get to the main bad guy, and then we say, no, we're not going to kill him because we have to prove
This is where we draw the line.
right. We have to prove we're better than him. I'm like, you just killed all the like scrubs on the payroll, and you're not going to murder the guy whose fault all of this was? I've gotten very burned out about that.
It should be like the other way, where you kill
Right.
the big bad, but not the little underlings who are just, you know, following orders or whatever.
Right.
So,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I kind of got to that, and I was like, ugh, we're really going to do this? Like, especially after reading the like Truth, Justice, and the American Way part, I'm like, if you think this is the American way, I got some bad news for you, Tom King.
well, you must be wrong.
Yeah. And I don't know. Are you tired of that trope? What were your thoughts on that when you got to that part?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it's at the point where it's like it's a cliche now, right? And it's like it does feel like a little bit like virtue signaling, like, oh, we're better than him.
Yeah.
You know, like, are you though?
Are you though?
If you like is that really the better option? Like, and I mean, like, I think it makes sense in terms of like, I mean, people obviously talk about it a lot in terms of Batman, right? Like, he has a no-kill thing, which, like, totally fair enough. Is the better scenario to leave these people alive to inflict more pain. Who knows? Well, I mean, but at the same time, who like judge, jury, executioner is always a bad
Right.
thing. But
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 I think the
it,
difference is though with like Batman, at least he's consistent.
that's true. Yeah, exactly. Like he won't kill
He won't
anyone.
kill
I mean,
anyone.
he'll maim them,
Yeah.
but he like it's not like he's like like cut up a bunch of henchmen and then gone, oh, Joker, good job, let's get you to jail.
Right,
Which
exactly.
which is like a bit of a turn, and I think like in a war, people die. That is what happens. But like that like this viceroy or whatever, like probably deserved it.
Yeah.
To be fair,
And I think you kind of like you said a moment ago virtue signaling, and I agree with that 100%
yeah,
because I think like people make fun of the Batman thing all the time, but my feeling is like, yeah, and he sticks by that code consistently.
absolutely.
I think
Yeah,
by
like if he was inconsistent, then I think it would be a different story.
right, and by the end of this book, the Omega Men have racked up such a body count that I'm like, I get what you're trying to go for, but after everything you've shown me up to this point, it feels deeply unsatisfying. And if
Yeah,
you maybe
yeah,
presented something that they were going to do to ensure that he'd get justice in some way, maybe that would be better. But as it was, it just didn't work for me.
yeah. I agree. Actually, thinking again of the Batman thing in the Batman Urban Legends #6, where
Mm-hmm.
Batman goes to kill the guy who gives him like the happy gas or whatever. I don't know if you read it.
I haven't read it now.
And then Jason Todd is like as much as I like want you to do this is not the person to do that for. Like he I mean he's not, and I think that works well too in that case because it is genuinely like this isn't what you want to do. Like you're not like this at all.
Right, right.
Versus yeah, like you said, like we have just killed everyone to get here, but this is a step too far.
Right.
I mean, I agree with you that I think that is like a played out trope in a lot of things, and it almost like I said, I do think it should almost be the other way around, where it's like you can kill like the big bad guy, but like all the soldiers in the war like who didn't probably just were like a circumstance of where they were born.
Right.
Not to quote me or anything, but
But especially after so much of the book is about like exploring the nuances of these characters who would typically be written off as evil, to
yeah,
then have them just like mercilessly murder all the like grunts and then try to take the moral high ground with the lead bad guy, it just rings hollow. And I'm not,
yeah,
yeah, I'm not advocating for like relentless slaughter, but you can't take the moral, yeah, you can't take the moral high ground at that point. You know what I mean?
yeah, exactly. I think if you've already got blood on your hands, then what's one more? No,
No,
but I like. And then there's also I mean, what I thought was interesting, and I thought was like a little, is after that scene where they kill the viceroy, where Kyle drops his cross and then it like ends up covered in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little bit confused as to why he did that. But it was a cool page.
It was a cool page. Sometimes it's just got to look cool, Danny. Yeah, I wasn't quite clear on the symbolism of that either.
Yeah, because he doesn't like give up his religion or anything.
Right.
Although actually, isn't there? He does have that. It's this book, right? I've read so much in the past like week that it's this book where he's like it was my God that allowed these people
yes,
to die.
yes. Which is interesting
So,
because his faith, I don't, at least from the Kyle Rayner comics I've read, his faith has never been explored in this level of depth before. Like this was getting to like Matt Murdock Daredevil levels of like Catholic guilt.
Yeah, exactly. From my understanding, this was like the first kind of exploration of that.
Right.
I don't know if it's really like I don't even know if he has a religion prior to this.
Right.
He potentially. But as far as I'm aware, I think this was like the first thing. And actually, interestingly, the prayer that he says as he like drops it is also a prayer that he says in Heroes in Crisis. In his little
interesting
panel.
There you go.
which so obviously Tom King
Tom
is a
King
big fan.
callback. He wrote that one down clearly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he was like, "This is it."
So getting into some of the more specific Omega Men characters here for a moment, the thing I kind of found myself feeling, like talking a little bit about some of the choices in it ringing hollow a little bit, it almost kind of made me wish that, like, as much as I liked that Kyle got a spotlight and as much as I liked someone doing something with him, it kind of almost made me wish that, like, Primus and Callista were a bit more of the spotlight of the whole thing.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know how
Like
you felt about that.
it almost like that almost feels like it would have been a more interesting story.
Right, yeah.
Um, I guess like there's always like a benefit in being like I think often a I don't want to say a crutch, but like a an argument that argument's the wrong word, but a device that writers use is to have an outsider come in and we are
Very
meant
true.
to like see the
Yes.
world through the outsider. Um, but I think that means that we have to spend time with Kyle's emotions when like really it's probably like you said, like Callista is probably who we would have benefited from following
Yes.
to get a lot more, maybe more of that emotional impact behind it,
Right,
because
yeah.
even though you know we see Kyle react to the mass grave, it probably like it almost like would be more impactful if it was someone from that system, because he's
Yes.
not he like obviously that's going to impact anyone, but like I think it would be different if you grew up in this world and you know you thought that the Alpha were like the right and the Citadel was doing what was right for the world
Right.
and like everything, to then have that broken versus someone who's like, oh, I already knew that there was like a war
Right. I
going on
already
here,
know
like
that there's problems everywhere here and yeah.
yeah, yeah,
His sort of mind is, well, I shouldn't say his mind is made up because he is eventually sort of becomes sympathetic towards the Omega Men, but he's more aware there's a problem from the beginning. There's a corruption.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I also feel like the idea of Primus's story, I find it to be more interesting and compelling, and I wanted to get more of it. Like the idea that he was a pacifist who turned to violence, but still believes that like pacifism is the route to liberation. I'm like, that's really interesting, and I want more of that.
Yeah, that would have been like a really interesting thing to explore. And it like, and I think, I mean, it's a throwaway line at the end where they're like, his movement objected to what he did, and they
Yeah,
can't accept it.
yeah,
And it's like that would have been like a really interesting thing to see.
right.
um,
And I think
but
you could do the ending of we're not going to kill him because we're better than that with him, because then it becomes like he finally decides he needs to go back to his old ways, but he's already broken his code so much that that's why his people won't accept him any
yeah,
longer.
yeah, that would make a lot of sense versus like Callista, who is already clearly like a, I don't want to say bloodthirsty, but
Yeah, no, but she
is
is.
already like it's already like a bit of a, I mean, I guess with her, it sounded like before when she was pre queen or princess that they used to like just fight people and kill them for funsies in the morning.
Exactly. Like, and that was another aspect of it too that I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. That like the most prominent female
Yeah.
character is like a sociopathic murderer, whose
Yeah.
entire like moral compass and this whole thing is very skewed and unclear. I'm like, that makes me feel a little icky on that one, Tom King. I don't know how I feel
Yeah.
about that. Yeah,
Yeah, I remember reading that and being like, oh,
yeah.
oh, okay.
I think there's a lot of things in it that, like a lot of pieces of the world building that I thought were really strong and interesting. Like Primus, I thought the idea of like Brute as a character and the religion that he was a part of, I thought was really interesting and compelling. And that big issue that where he sacrifices himself, I think is like really strong and really great. I think there's a lot of good things in it. I just wish that like the whole of it had come together a bit more strongly and effectively in the end.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and I mean, it could be because this is, I guess, effectively early on in his career.
Sure.
I think he was 2015. Was he not writing Vision at the same time?
I don't know. I can Google that real quick, but at the very least, you are 100% correct that it is like super early in his career. I'm
Yeah, and he.
Yeah, it would have been around the same time.
Hmm.
But this is
And
this is ostensibly his second or third comic book, really. Like it's very early.
yeah, which like and to be fair, and I think his storytelling has gotten more cohesive. Like, and it does feel. I do like. I think there is like a bit of a disjoint between the first half. I think it's because we have to spend so long being like, why is Kyle killed?
Right,
In
right,
that
right.
first, that like it's that like a lot of time is kind of wasted on that. That like it feels like a little bit disjointed from like we
Totally.
have to get a lot of exposition in order to understand the story fully for the 12 issues that we have.
Right, right.
The last 6 issues I think are really great. The last half of the series,
Sure,
I think
yeah.
was it's pretty decent.
And I
But I do
also
think that like
wonder if he knew because I maybe I was wrong about this, but I don't think it was announced as a 12 issue miniseries initially.
no, I think it got cancelled. I
Yeah,
actually read that today. It sounded like it got cancelled around issue 6.
right.
So then they must have been like, oh, this is 12 issues, so here you go.
Which would explain some of that feeling of like, oh, the structure is a little wonky and clunky because maybe they thought they were
Yeah,
going to have
definitely.
more room to finish it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which fair enough.
Do you feel this is kind of the feeling that I have come to about his work? But I'm curious if you think this. I have kind of come to the conclusion that I think when he is writing something that is not as directly personal to him and his experience, I tend to like it better. And I think going back to like what we were saying before about the clunkiness of the like truth, justice, and the American way line, and the like both sides are bad, and how the pacifism message kind of rings hollow. I think part of me is like, yeah, but Tom King, you were in the CIA. Like, there's a part of me that like has a hard time totally buying it from him. But then, like, when I
Yeah,
read Mr. Miracle or I read Vision, I really enjoy the message and the way it all kind of like comes home and sticks the landing for me. I don't know if you feel that way or if that's
yeah.
something that's affected your perspective on it, but what do you think?
So I probably would agree with that. I really liked Vision. I think it was a really great, and it's interesting that that's his only Marvel work. Because obviously he then became
Yeah,
DC. But I think Vision was done so well, and you are probably right that it is because it's so far removed from that war allegory
right.
that it has to deal with other things. Um, and I distinctly remember crying reading that
It's
series, and I think
good.
that was done really
It's really
well.
good.
And the other the other one that I do really like is I really like the Everyone Loves Ivy arc in
Yes.
Batman, which he did do, which again is not really war based. I thought that was done really well, and I think made a lot of sense for Ivy's character, and I think that was a good.
What is it about that arc that really
Mix.
stands out for you? Because I remember reading it and I liked it quite a bit, but I want to hear like your take on it. What was it about that one in particular that really like struck a chord with you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the idea that really anyone can be kind of like struck by that. Like it almost feels like I guess Ivy was like really lonely, and like it's Harley that ends up breaking her out of that kind of
Sure.
thing. And she's so like immensely powerful, and she's clearly always had that
Yeah, yeah.
capability. I mean, if you take that, but it's like this thing that sets her off, and she's just like, no, like I'm going to control everything. Um, Good luck, Batman. Who just manages to stab himself in the right time. But yeah, I thought I think Tom King excels in short stories. I think
Hmm.
he's like a very good short arc kind of guy. Like
Definitely.
I think he does really well there. And I think because again, you kind of strip away with Everyone Loves Ivy, and I think also with Vision, a lot of the characters are stripped away, and it's like really bare minimum people to be involved in
Sure.
both stories.
There's not a lot of
And I think that
other universe crossover
yeah,
BS that
it's like
comes in.
it's not like relying on like like I mean I guess Superman shows up in Everyone Loves Ivy, but like it's not like oh, Superman showed up and like did some stuff, and he's really cool and he's doing cool stuff. You know, like I think it is really clearly like story based, and I do really like that, and I really value that in a comic. But sometimes it is hit or miss.
Yeah, it could be.
So
I'm laughing in my chat. Small Swole said like Stephen Moffat. We would need a whole other hour for
that
me to
is
share my
exactly
Stephen
how I feel
Moffat.
about. Yeah, that's
I,
exactly how I feel about
yeah,
Marvel.
we would need a whole other hour to get into my thoughts on Doctor Who and Stephen Moffat in particular. But I do kind of have similar feelings about him and Tom King, which is like when they're good, they're great, and when they're bad, you're kind of like, what's happening here? What are we
That,
even doing?
that, and I think it's hard because on the surface level, both really fantastic writers, but when you really look at their entire work, like there is really like a lot of shit, but there's like such good diamonds in there that
Right,
like it's
right.
hard to be a fan.
And it's funny too because going back to like this idea of vision, that premise of the superhero having the breakdown in the suburb is what WandaVision is. Like we don't get
Yeah, yeah,
WandaVision without that Tom King book, which
yeah,
is so funny because like it takes that premise and really kind of makes it Wanda story, which I am of the opinion, and this is a very hot take for me, but I am of the opinion that I think WandaVision and the James Robinson Scarlet Witch comic are probably the two best Wanda Maximoff centric stories ever. Partly because so much of that character's story has been so driven by like old dudes who didn't know how to write female characters. Like that's
yeah,
unfortunately
yeah,
something that Wanda Maximoff has really suffered because of that. But yeah, I think it's telling that like they took that groundwork and built their story around it. And sure, it got a lot more surreal and weird with all the sitcom homages, but like that cover of that first issue of Vision, where it's like the family like peeking through the doorway and waving at the camera, it's like Leave It to Beaver with Vision. Like you get the whole idea of it right there. So yeah, I agree. Like when he is on, he can create something that is not only a strong work on its own, but can inspire someone to do their own variation of it through adaptation and create something that is
yeah,
also very compelling and very interesting. But I think that his best work is always going to come from when he has that degree of personal separation from it.
yeah. I think he's clearly too caught up in the war
Which
allegory, and I
and yeah,
just
and like, look, I get it. Like, it's a lot. I totally get it, and this is not to
yeah,
like. I don't want it to ever come across like I'm belittling someone for their commitment to that because that's very complex, and I have a lot of feelings on that. But it is the sort of thing where it's like, yeah, the I don't know if there's a good way to tell those kinds of stories yet. You know what I mean? I think.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I'm
I think
rambling a lot. Go ahead.
we're still too like it's still too current. Like I
Yeah,
like there's it's still going on. Like like we're not
yeah,
far enough removed for us to be able to like make to make commentary that on the nose about it. If that makes sense.
yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that.
Especially it does feel it like I think you said this earlier. It does feel like a little bit like like he was in the CIA. Like it's not like he's like Mr. Peace and Love, like
Right.
so
And it's interesting because I think he's willing to acknowledge that in the comic,
yeah.
whether it's this or Adam Strange. But it is that sort of thing where it's like there's that I think it was something that goes around on Twitter every now and then, and it's basically like I'm gonna misquote it, but the essential phrase is like America's a messed up place because it'll send its soldiers to other countries to kill people and then make Academy Award winning movies about how it made them sad.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, yeah, like I don't want to belittle anyone's trauma that they endured, but at the same time it's hard to, I don't want to say hard to sympathize, but sometimes there is that, again, ringing hollow aspect of it where it's like
Yeah.
we were the bad guys in a lot of that stuff, right? Like we did a lot of
Yeah,
things
yeah,
that are not
exactly.
okay
Yeah,
morally.
which is why things like truth, justice, and the American way really it's like, ooh, Don't
Yeah.
like that. Like that, because that's not the American way.
Right. Right.
So, so that sort of thing. That's where, like, to me, I was like, oh, I don't like that. But I do like. I mean, obviously, there's things that do ring true, like that, like we were saying before. Like, there's people on both sides that are often not bad people. And that, there's people on both sides that are bad people. And that is clearly true for the Omega Men, and it's true for real life. But yeah, I would agree that I think that the war stuff, I think he should stay clear of a little bit.
Or and I
But yeah,
like
I
it.
mean,
Yeah, and I think if he wants to explore the ideas of like trauma and going through like traumatic psychological experiences, I think he can do that well, as seen in like Mr. Miracle and Vision, without having to have the
mhm.
war commentary aspects of it in it too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, even realistically in Heroes in Crisis, I do think a lot of those confessionals are done really well and
Mm,
make a lot of sense. I mean, the whole series as a whole doesn't go very well, but I think the confessionals really were like a bright spot in that. So
totally.
that's definitely something. And actually something that I thought was interesting is there's clearly an influence from the Omega Men in the art in Heroes in Crisis, where it
Definitely.
has those stationary 9 panels,
Yes.
and it's almost like we're the camera, if that makes sense.
Right. Right. Right.
Um,
He loves
which
the
I thought was
nine-panel
cool. And
grid.
like
Tom King.
exactly, the 9 panel grid is. I actually even looked up. I was like, it wasn't the same artist, maybe, but it wasn't. So
No,
there you
I
go.
think he just likes that technique a lot because I think if I'm remembering correctly, it
Yeah.
shows up a lot in Mr. Miracle too.
Yeah, it's. I guess it's almost very cinematic, I would say.
Yeah, I
In
mean, it's the Watchmen panel layout.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
the like face of a clock moving around a comic book page, and that's like
yeah.
the big thing that like matters the most to him.
Yeah,
Small
yeah,
Swole said like
absolutely. Yeah,
99% of Mr. Miracle. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And I think that's I think that part's definitely done very well in both Omega Men and Heroes in Crisis. And there's a
Yeah,
lot of really cool fight scenes, I thought, as well in Omega Men,
yeah,
that I did enjoy.
yeah. I think those sequences are
Specifically,
very well done.
yeah, the fight between Callista and Tigor, I think, was pretty cool,
Yeah,
I
in the
thought.
elevator,
I enjoyed that. Yeah,
that
before
sequence
we
is great.
knew.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So
And I want to give a shout out. I'm looking up their names here because I want to make sure I got them right. Barnaby Bagenda and Toby Cypress are the artists of Tom
yes.
King's Omega Men. Put their names on the front cover of the book, DC. What
I
are we
know.
doing?
I mean,
That's.
let me check what my cover looks like.
I think their names are on in like the lower corner, but it's like Tom King's Omega Man, and it's like, all right, people drew this comic too, guys.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
I think I actually also have the deluxe edition.
Yeah.
Um, so but I did one of the things that I did really like is I liked those posters between the issues, which I assume were the covers of the issues when they came out as single issues.
Yeah, those were beautiful.
Where it
Those were
had
great.
like yeah, where it had the first one where it was like a pristine version, and then it had like kind of like the graffiti version, like
Right.
the next one, or like it was like torn or like had blood on it. I thought that was like really cool, and I really
Yeah.
enjoyed that.
I think the world building of a lot of this comic is really strong, and those covers do
Yeah,
a lot to make that happen, to kind of put you in the mindset of like, this is a civilization. They have like they're like tourism posters, a lot of them, or
yeah,
propaganda posters, some of them. But it helps to encapsulate this world building that they did, which I think is one of the stronger aspects of the book as a whole. Let's share final thoughts. What were your let's final thoughts on this book as a whole? Like, would you recommend this to people to check out? Like, what is your final judgment on the book?
So I mean, as a whole, I do think like I did enjoy it. I mean, there is like flaws to it, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I probably would recommend it, especially for people if they're like looking to get into car arena. Like I think this would probably be
I would agree with
like
that.
a really solid one to suggest.
Sure,
But I did enjoy it, and I think the art is like really phenomenal, which is
totally.
like a sticking point for me. So what about you? Where would you fall?
I think ultimately, I think the critique that I would give it is like kind of not the book's fault. which is like sometimes you go back and you read a book or you watch a movie that was very groundbreaking for its time and influenced a lot of stuff. And then you've watched all the things that it's influenced, so then when you go back and read it or watch it, you're kind of like, well, this doesn't seem that crazy and groundbreaking. You kind of have to put yourself in the mindset of like, no, when this came out, no one had ever seen anything like it before. And like going back to this, having read so much Tom King, I'm kind of like, well, this is just a Tom King comic. You have to kind of reset your brain.
Yeah, exactly, because no one was reading this and going like, oh, Heroes in Crisis was like this.
Yeah, exactly. You have to reset your brain to when it was coming out. And I think, honestly, of the like Tom King war allegory comics, I probably think this is one of the better ones. I think ultimately I came down on liking it more than like Strange Adventures, for example, which I think leans so far into the war allegory stuff that it becomes a little like borderline tasteless at points. Yeah. And again, like bending and breaking characters, like we didn't have to ruin Adam Strange. That wasn't necessary. I don't know if we needed to do this. But the Omega Men, I think it's an interesting take on those characters. And would love to maybe see them come back in some capacity with this story in mind. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, ultimately, like if you like Tom King and by some chance you haven't read this, I would say go for it. If you don't like Tom King, this book's not going to change your mind, I don't think, ultimately on that guy. So, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
All right, well, this was so awesome talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy vacation to do this. Of course. I love talking comics with folks. Before we wrap up, is there any book that you're reading right now that anybody watching this you feel like they should definitely check out? From any publisher. I'm putting you on the spot here.
Publisher.
Yeah.
So if you haven't read Nocterra, which is by Image Studio, it's so good. It actually just got a TV deal as well.
Oh.
It's by Scott Snyder. And it really plays a lot with visuals because of I guess the premise is basically if anyone gets caught, like the sun went away and anyone caught in darkness gets turned into a monster. So understandably, there's a lot of play with light in the comics, which I think is done really well. And I think there's a lot of really pretty panels. So everything's kind of like artificially light with like fairy lights and everything.
Cool.
It's really cool. Very good story.
I gotta read it. I really gotta check that book out. It sounds so cool. Small Swole in the chat asked, when are you announcing the next book? Well, I'll announce it right now, and I'll probably make a TikTok about it this weekend. We're going to be reading with For the Love of Comics, Michael Mead. We're going to be reading Battle for the Cowl, which I'm excited about. Big Bat Family book. Yeah, and he's a Nightwing expert, so I'm excited to talk Batman sidekicks with him. That's going to be a fun conversation. All right. Well, thank you to anyone who's watching. Yeah, keep reading comics. That's the best advice I can give you in life.
Comics are cool.
Yeah, they're pretty good. Check them out. I'm a fan. All right. Have a good night.
All right. Bye. Bye-bye.